You are listening to the Breaktime Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. Fall is always a busy season for both work and home, but I'm doing my best to soak up bits and pieces amongst the hustle. I have an upcoming GraphRAG training that I'm giving, and I was trying to create a LangChain4j version of the Spring AI app I'm using for that class, but I ran into several roadblocks that don't currently have a resolution. Then I happened to come across an article where vector search was wrapped into an MCP server that another application could call as a tool. I'll get into more details. Let's get started. The first roadblock I came across this week was trying to convert a Spring AI app that I had and that I'm using for a course next week into a LangChain4j application with Neo4j and some generative AI stuff. And the biggest thing that I came across was that LangChain4j and Quarkus seem to default to an auto configuration for the embedding store, which is great, super nice. A lot of frameworks will do this for you, but I think the standard approach is to do one type of RAG in an application. And it's not super easy to configure vector RAG and GraphRAG together. So you can configure a retrieval query, but you will set that through a property in the application.properties or the properties file. But when you set that, it's true across all instances of the vector store. Beans or instances you might use across classes, packages, whatever, it picks that configuration up from the properties file. But what if you wanted to have more than one? For instance, I want to run vector search without the retrieval query, and then I want to run a hybrid search, vector plus graph retrieval. And I currently cannot find a way to simply do this. There doesn't seem to be a way to configure one embedding store for vector and one config for hybrid. And it's clunky to do hybrid search, vector plus graph in Quarkus and LangChain4j. There's nothing like advisors, or they do have RAG modules. But again, the way that you configure them is very configure one and done, and you can't really customize that easily. Also, the only retriever option for Neo4j that I can find is text to Cypher, which is cool, but it does feel a little bit obsolete in light of something like the MCP Cypher server, which basically does that, and it's already provided to you. You don't have to recreate the wheel by building that functionality into your application. You just use Neo4j's MCP Cypher server. So that was something I was a little bit bummed about. And then that leaves us with the only way to do hybrid search, vector plus graph, is to write it all manually. There's no abstract or streamlined way to jump into that workflow. Again, you can configure your workflow and run it, but you don't have a whole lot of customization to say, hey, I want to configure it this way for this method and this way for another method. There doesn't seem to be a good way to do that. The other thing that stopped me dead in my tracks and just left me with a no-go, I can't convert this app right now, is that you can't configure the application to use a read-only role on the database. When you do LangChain4j and Quarkus, it requires you, when you use Neo4j Vector Store at least, it requires you to have create constraint privileges for the vector index. When I came across this, I was like, what? There's no way. They have to have some sort of property. Spring AI has some sort of property. They have an initialize schema, and you can set that to false. And I did some research, and there were several things that popped up that made it seem, yes, this should be configurable for LangChain4j, but I could not find it. So this stopped me dead in the tracks. I was working with a read-only database. I don't really want to have to spin up a brand new database and have to deal with giving it write privileges and so on. This is supposed to be a public read-only database that anybody can access. There should be a way that you don't have to force your application to have write privileges to the database. That just seems wrong to me. This is something that I was a little bit frustrated by and quite bummed about, actually, because I feel like that should be a default configuration. I looked at some of the other data stores that are available in LangChain4j, and I know at least MongoDB offers that configuration property, but it's just not available in all of the vector stores. Oh, and by the way, most of the straight up native vector stores don't really need this. I think a lot of it is because of the type of data store that they are and the types of use cases and how they're being used today. Most of your vector plus something else, so where they've added vector indexes onto another data model, for instance, something like a document database, a NoSQL database, a graph database, a relational database, and they've tacked on vector support, will have some sort of this configuration parameter to say, don't write to the database to initialize the schema or create the vector index in this case. But Neo4j is one of the few that does not offer this right now. Hopefully that will be added. I would love to see that there. I will definitely be submitting an issue to the GitHub repository, maybe even trying to see if I can get a PR in on that to see if I can change that. Also, someone asked me a question this week about data importer and pushing data back and forth from SQL Server. And so I pulled up documentation, sent the documentation along. It looks a little out of date. This documentation doesn't show SQL Server, but I went into the data importer tool and it does show it there. So I took a screenshot and sent that along, plus the link to the docs, and then went back to the documentation team. We offer way more options for data import now in our data importer tool. And there's two separate documentations, one for a data importer standalone tool where you can spin up your own data importer tool as a totally separate thing. And then there's a different link for the data importer tool in Aura, which provides a lot more of those capabilities for integration with other types of data import and back and forth data flow between other types of databases in Neo4j. So I found this was really interesting. There are two separate documentation pieces, one for standalone data importer and one for Aura data importer. But I think there is going to be some updates now to at least link between the two so that you can find if you have gotten to the wrong one and need to go to the other one. That should be coming, but I did not know there were totally separate documentation pieces for whether you're running the data importer tool standalone or within Aura. Next, I mentioned that I was working on the LangChain4j and Quarkus app for the online training that I'm giving next week. I do have a GraphRAG Fundamentals online course. If you happen to be part of the O'Reilly Media subscription, then you should have access to join the course. You are more than welcome to do so. It's about 3 hours long. It will be hands-on, interactive, some slides, some demos, some walkthrough exercises, and so on. I would love to see you there, but I will definitely be posting some follow-ups and things that I've learned and things that I really enjoyed about that in the future. Also, Neo4j's big online conference is in less than a month now. It's Nodes 2025, just a couple of weeks now. Don't forget to register and scope out the agenda. Plus, Andrew Ng is a keynote speaker this year, which is super exciting. We have also some other amazing keynotes and key speakers that are coming and speaking at the event. Lots of content. It will be a jam-packed 24 hours. It is totally free and entirely virtual, and there is content that is spanned, again, across 24 hours. So no matter where you are in the world, there is something that will fit your schedule. Check that out. I will leave the link in the show notes. I'm also working on a Java book with a co-writer, which I'm super excited about. I am enjoying getting back into the writing swing of things, and I will keep you posted with more details in the future. Next, I came across a piece of content that was a bit serendipitous because I had talked about dealing with LangChain4j and Quarkus and Spring AI and trying to write vector plus graph retrievals being a little bit complicated to do that hybrid search. And I just came across an article from Neo4j's developer blog that's called Implementing Neo4j GraphRAG Retrievers as MCP Server, which I found really interesting. And working through the blog post, it talks about wrapping a vector similarity search as an MCP server and then exposing that so that other applications can ping that tool. The blog post walks through how to customize the retriever so that the embeddings aren't being passed through the large language model, which can get expensive, chew up a lot of resources, and so on. Then the blog post walks through how to expose it as a tool for an agentic application to call and use. This could also open the doors for solving the GraphRAG problems I keep running into. Instead of coding the vector search plus graph retrieval in every application that I write, I could build an MCP server that exposes the tool and other apps could call that. This makes the functionality consistent, reliable, and reusable, and reduces a lot of the headaches that I've been dealing with lately. This week was full of interesting content, a few roadblocks with LangChain4j and Quarkus, and some differences between that and Spring AI. Hopefully, I will have some breakthroughs on that soon. I have a GraphRAG Fundamentals online course coming up, and Nodes 2025 is just around the corner, and I'm getting back into the swing of things by working on a Java book. Then we talked about how to implement GraphRAG retrievers as an MCP server. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.